Hello, everyone, and welcome to another live stream. So, fun fact about today so far. I woke up this morning with a slightly sore throat, and I was like, you know what, nothing too bad. But as the day went on, I got more and more tired and felt more and more sick. So, I'm gonna do this live stream. Hopefully I have the energy. Hopefully, it's not too obvious, but I just put that out there right away. Um, but yeah, so anyway. Today I'm going to be reacting to who are the Yoruba people, and partially why I picked this video. One, I'm going through kind of these Kojito videos. I find them entertaining. I don't know. I like their style. They've just been fun to react to. But I found this Kojito. I'm reacting to another one of these Kojito videos, and the Yoruba people, actually, I made a video recently, not that long ago, about Santeria. And Santeria is actually rooted in Yoruba religion. And Yoruba religion is kind of like the beginning of that. So that's partially why I wanted to react to this, because I was like, I want to learn more about the Yoruba religion, the Yoruba people. So I think we're going to do that today. We're going to have some fun with it and go like that. So as always, if you enjoy this live stream, if you enjoy these type of videos, leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to interact with the live chat, you have to be a subscriber to do that, and you also get notified of future live streams, things like that. So definitely do that. But yeah, all right. So I think I'm just gonna jump right in. We'll see how this goes. I think it's like 25 minutes long, so we'll see how this goes. All right. Let's see what the Yoruba people believe.
By Curiosity Stream, get access to Nebula, a video streaming service made by your favorite educational creators when you sign up for Curiosity Stream using the link in the description. This is Yoruba land, the homeland of the Yoruba people. With a population of about 46 million, the Yoruba are one of the largest ethnic groups in Africa and one of the three major ethnic groups in modern day Nigeria, along with the Hausa and the Igbo. The Yoruba built one of the largest empires in West Africa, crafted some of humanity's finest art, and looked damn good doing it. Their artists are famous worldwide, and no other African culture has affected the Americas and the Caribbean as much as the Yoruba, who left a mark through people, dance, food, and the religions of Santeria and Candomblé. So, who are the Yoruba? What is their history? And what does it have to do with a universe-creating chicken? Well, let's find out.
I can already tell this is gonna be an interesting one. This is gonna be an interesting religion.
Geography. Yoruba land is a cultural region that stretches across southwestern Nigeria, Benin, and Togo. Most Yoruba live in Nigeria, where they make up 21% of the population.
Wow.
The largest cities in Yoruba land are Ilorin with 1 million people, Ibadan with 3.8 million, and Lagos, or Echo in the Yoruba language, with 15 million people. That's 3 times more people than live in my entire country. Yoruba land is a diverse landscape, with dense tropical forests and mangroves in the south, and northwards you'll find a rugged highland region where you can see these cool inselbergs like Olosunta. And the north also has a Guinea savanna region. Yoruba land is home to the Mona monkey, the African forest elephant, leopards, the adorable Senegalese bush baby, and parrots, which have played a sacred role in Yoruba history. Language. There are many different Yoruba groups with their own unique cultures, but they are united by the Ede Yoruba, the Yoruba language, spoken by 47 million people.
See, that's one thing I didn't know. The one thing I didn't know is that the Yoruba is like very much diverse. Like, it's a very diverse religion and so forth. What I didn't know is that actually what it seems like so far, it seems like what combines them to a certain extent is language, culture, and maybe some certain beliefs. But that is interesting that the language is a big combining factor here.
Is a tonal language like Chinese, where the tone you use influences the meaning of the word. The tonal aspect of Yoruba means that it can be mimicked easily. For example, there is actually a form of whistled Yoruba used to communicate over long distances. This means people who have arrived for me, greetings at work. The Yoruba talking drum also speaks by mimicking the tonal and rhythmic features of Yoruba words. For millennia, the Yoruba passed on their history orally, and so the talking drum acted as one way to pass history from one generation to the next. Islam arrived in Yoruba land in the 14th century from Mali, Africa's great centre of Islamic learning, and brought with it Ajami, a form of Arabic script, which was the first script the Yoruba language was ever written in.
Oh,
In the 19th
interesting.
century, Christian missionaries introduced the Latin alphabet which Yoruba is now written in. Yoruba is just one name for Yoruba speakers. They also call themselves Omo Ile Kara Ojire, literally meaning the children of the land where we greet good morning, did you wake up well? There is a stereotype in Nigeria that it
That's
takes
a really,
Yoruba 10
really long
minutes
name.
to say hello. Yoruba are big on greetings, kind questions and showing respect. If one Yoruba walks by another Yoruba and they don't greet each other, you can safely assume there is some drama happening. There are many greeting styles depending on the person, time, weather and event. The most basic hello is simply pele or epele. If it's rainy, you can greet with ku ojo. If someone has just given birth, you greet with ku ewu omo. And if you're greeting an elder sitting down, you say e kujoku. Yoruba always greet elders with e. Elders get the most respectful greetings. Traditionally, when greeting elders, a woman may kneel down while a man may lie chin and chest to the ground. History. Around 4,500 years ago, ancient Yoruba speakers had already settled in the thick forests of West Africa and began farming yam and oil palms. It's difficult to know exactly the size of the early Yoruba civilization, but through oral traditions and archaeology, we know Yoruba culture was here, 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 and here. So it's safe to say it was pretty big. The Yoruba preserve their history orally and have multiple creation stories. One version says, in the beginning there was nothing but water and the sky above. The supreme god Olodumare sent down Obutala to create the earth. Obutala descended to earth on a chain armed with nothing but a snail shell full of dirt, a palm nut, and a chicken. He dropped the first piece of dirt where the city of Ife is now located. Ife means the source.
One thing about like religions like these, where they have like multiple legends of how like the world started, they have like these multiple myths and these different stories. Really, what always intrigues me is how did these like stories come to be? Like how did they develop? How did they? Because it sounds like this is like an orally based religion. So for a long time, it was probably orally passed down, orally told. These stories were shared. These myths were shared. So it's just kind of curious to me, like, what does that actually look like? How did these stories come to be? What was the origin of these? Like, some of these things are just very hard to get historically. But it's just interesting to know, like, these stories because they're so, like, mystical. They're so mythical and things that sometimes I'm really just intrigued by how did they start?
Of the spreading. And with a lot of pecking, the cosmic chicken spread the earth to create all of the continents. Soon the palm nut sprouted, and that was the beginning of life on Earth. In another version, during the creation, Obutala did well at first. He even started forming little clay figurines that became the first humans. But Obutala got really drunk on some palm wine and couldn't finish the job of creation. And so the god Oduduwa finished it for him. It took about 4 days for the world to be created, and so the Yoruba calendar is made up of a 4-day week. Oduduwa is recognized as the father of the Yoruba people, and Ife is their symbolic center. Around the 700s BCE, the Yoruba were already producing iron. This was a huge
It's also interesting to me about like some of these religions, like the Yoruba religions, or like if you look at Greek mythology or Roman mythology or things like that. The gods are constantly like the gods are very much human-like, and what I mean by that is they make a lot of mistakes. They kind of pull pranks on people. They get drunk in this case, or things like that. The gods seem to be very much like humans, and like in Greek culture, especially Greek gods, Roman gods, like Norse gods, like they always seem to act like humans, and it's just always interesting to me that these great beings are perceived to almost be like sometimes like idiots, sometimes like just really selfish and evil. Like it's just interesting to me because like you'd almost think that you would want to create. If you're creating a religion or if you're talking about gods and stuff, you would almost seem like you'd want them to be these great, superior moral beings. But I guess if that's not part of the tradition or that's not how you perceive gods to be, then I guess that's how things get passed down differently.
Element. One, because they somehow discovered ironworking before bronze, which has driven historians mad for years now. And two, because iron slaps. With iron hoes, machetes, axes, and other tools, the Yoruba pushed the dark, dense forests away from their settlements. This opened up new farmland, settlements expanded, and trade grew. Iron was crucial. One of the Yoruba's most important gods, or orishas, was Ogun, the god of iron and blacksmiths, also called the creator of civilizations. As the thick forests turned into thriving farmland, the once separate towns joined together forming ilu, something we could compare to city-states. At their centre was the Afin, which was the palace of the Oba, or king. Right next to the palace was the main market, the Oja Oba. The rest of the city radiated out from there. The Yoruba became one of the most urbanized groups in ancient Africa. And what do urban societies have? Craftspeople, blacksmiths, weavers, sculptors, and all sorts of specialized professions. These masters of wood, stone, clay, and metal would travel between ilus looking for work. The market was central to Yoruba life and was well organized with guilds and unions where both men and women could participate, but where women had a special place in trade, having at least one elected Iyaloja, or mother of the market, who represented the traders in the Oba's palace. The Yoruba traded widely on the trans-Sahara and West African trade routes. The most traded resources were yams, salt,
Like, this is almost like the Yoruba people. What's interesting to me is like it's almost more than just a religion. It's more than almost a set of beliefs. It's a whole way of life. It's a culture. It's a marketplace. It's a language. Like it's like a whole way of society. It almost reminds me of like Hinduism to a certain extent, where it's like it's just ingrained in society. It's not just a set of beliefs. It's not just religion. It like encompasses every single aspect of life, which I think is interesting.
Iron, herbs, leather, palm oil, palm wine, raffia products, textiles, and the cola nut. That's the nut that was used to make the original Coca-Cola, along with cocaine. Most Yoruba cities had multiple shrines and beautifully maintained gardens, and were surrounded with massive mud walls. One settlement called Sungbo's Eridu, built by Queen Belixu Sungbo around 1000 CE, had a 160-kilometer wall and ditch defense system. This required moving about 3.5 million cubic meters of earth, 1 million more than the pyramids, and formed a ring covering an area of about 2,000 square kilometers.
That's
50%
insane.
larger than modern London. This was one of the largest building projects in history.
Wow.
It was hidden by hundreds of years of rainforest growth, but is now joining other great African engineering marvels such as the pyramids, Timbuktu's mosques, and Great Zimbabwe.
Wow.
All these settlements were having a pretty chill and relaxed time. But then, in the 10th century, Oduduwa came. He was probably a leader from one of the smaller settlements around Ife, but then he decided to move his people a little closer to Ife. But he didn't want to bother with all the alliances and politics in place, so war. This caused a lot of death, destruction, stabbing, maiming, some slapping probably, and Oduduwa was winning. The chiefs of Ife panicked and sent Obutala, the king of Ife, to negotiate with Oduduwa. Apparently, Obutala was really bad at it since he was constantly drunk, which, wasn't great. The negotiations went nowhere. Seeing this, people flipped to Oduduwa's side. He won the war and became the king of Ife. As king, Oduduwa gave Ife the political hierarchy, structure, and bureaucracy a city of its size needed. So you might remember the names Obutala and Oduduwa from the creation of the universe, and that's because it is them. In the Yoruba religion, important living people were deified and became Orishas. In the centuries after
interesting.
Obutala and Oduduwa,
So they like literally. So does that mean that like pretty much anyone who is like extremely important to that religion, or extremely important to that people's history, becomes like a god? Wait, wasn't one of them just earlier? Oduduwa was like not the head god, but like the god of kind of like the Yoruba people, kind of overlooking the Yoruba people. That's interesting. So they take real life figures and make them gods. It almost makes me think of Roman Empire, where the Roman emperor was seen as a god, or in Egyptian times, where the Egyptian pharaoh was seen as a god. Like, this is not necessarily anything new, but it's just interesting that they actually take real life people and then make them into gods and go from there. Oh, the Deucer Dude, what's up, man? Reminds me of one of those games on the Apple Store. Fair enough.
Many other remarkable people would enter the heavenly realm as Orishas. The rich and now organized city of Ife attracted immigrants, and by 1300 CE, Ife had around 100,000 inhabitants, and its industry produced iron, glass, and other valuable goods. The artists at Ife around 1200 to 1400 CE crafted some of humanity's greatest pieces of art, such as the incredibly naturalistic Yoruba stone and metal sculptures.
Wow.
Oduduwa was a really smart guy and decided that instead of waiting to see his heirs fight each other to the death Game of Thrones style, he gave each of them a beautiful beaded crown and sent them away to found kingdoms of their own. One such prince was Oduduwa's grandson, Oranmiyan. Between the late 12th and early 13th centuries, Oranmiyan travelled to the far northwest borderlands of the Yoruba area. According to
Wait,
oral
13th
tradition,
century?
the chief of the
That would
Berean
have been like 1200 time period. So Yoruba religion isn't actually that old. Like in the grand scheme of religion, Yoruba religion isn't that old. It's actually rather young then. If it started in like the 13th century, 14th century time period, like, or the 12th century, something like that. If it started around that time period, it's actually not that old of a religion. It's actually younger than a lot of major religions today. Wow, that's interesting. What's up, Salima? Good night, friend. Do you know it's funny when I see good night, friends? Like it almost makes me think like you're going to bed and you're leaving. But good night, friend. Good to see you again. Good to see you. Good to see you. Triune God? Question mark. What are you asking about in reference to Triune God?
Iba people gave Oranmiyan a snake and told him to follow it. That snake had a great eye for real estate because it led Oranmiyan to a perfect location where he founded the city of Oyo. Unlike Ife, which was located in a heavily forested area, Oyo was in a Guinea savanna, a great open space ideal for farming and right between the Trans-Niger and Trans-Saharan caravan routes. By the end of the 16th century, the city of Oyo transformed into a powerful empire using imported horses. Yeah, horses, which is weird since horses and tropical Africa don't really go together. The disease-carrying tsetse fly likes to infect any large animal in the area with a horrible case of death. This made horses ridiculously expensive. But by taxing trade routes and producing valuable goods, the Oyo were rich enough to import horses from North Africa and over the scorching Sahara Desert. Using their cavalry forces and reportedly the best bone in Africa, the Oyo Empire conquered vast stretches of territory. The emperor of Oyo was called the Alafin of Oyo. The Alafin was not always the son of the previous Alafin and was not always male. A council of 7 chiefs called the Oyo Messi elected the Alafin from a pool of princes. The Oyo Messi was led by the Bashurun, or prime minister. They represented the interests of the empire and were supposed to prevent the Alafin from becoming a tyrant. The Oyo Messi's power was then checked by the Ogboni, a council of chiefs, and by the Eso, a group of high-ranking generals. And get this for checks on power. If the Alafin was doing a bad job, the Oyo Messi would vote and then send the Bashurun to present an empty calabash to the Alafin saying, "The people reject you, the gods reject you, and the earth rejects you also." The Alafin was expected to commit ritual suicide when this happened.
What?
This system of checks and balances kept the
This almost makes me think of a more complex version of United States politics, because like United States politics, there's this whole idea of checks and balances. So you have the judicial, the executive branch, and the what's the other one? Judicial branch, executive branch, and then you have Congress. But what's that actually called? I forget what the actual branch is called now, but it's Congress at least. But like these checks and balances and stuff, like I almost made me think of that. But it seems like a more complicated version of it, and also a little bit more extreme if you were supposed to commit ritual suicide if you acted outside of your bounds, which I guess you would be forced to do. I guess if you didn't commit ritual suicide, I guess then they would just murder you. I guess you don't really have much of a choice then, which seems like a pretty hard bargain. You should check out Army of Satan Part 25. It talks a lot about people in history who worship 3 gods. Sounds like a religion of works. I mean, yeah, it probably is. Like, I don't know exactly what they're trying to be saved, what their concept of sin is, or what their concept of salvation is. I'm not entirely sure what their concept of these things are yet. I'm not sure if they really have a concept of those things. Right now, it seems more like, it almost makes me think more of ancestral worship, because it seems like they take historical figures from the past, make them into deities, and then kind of like worship their spirits or worship their gods or whatever you might call it. And so, like, I don't know exactly what their concept of sin, salvation, or heaven, hell, or whatever these things are. I'm not entirely sure if they have concepts of these things or how they view these things. So we'll see if they address that. We're only like halfway through.
They are stable for centuries. By the middle of the 18th century, the Oyo were the largest empire in West Africa, connected to international markets and had tribute flowing in from conquered kingdoms. But with big empires comes big trouble. As the empire was at its peak in 1754, an ambitious Bazoun called Gaha conspired with the Oyo Messi to seize power for himself. He managed to get 4 successive Alafins to commit ritual suicide. Gaha's plot went on for 20 years. His scheme only came to an end in 1774 when the Alafin Abidoun executed Gaha. Alongside this, in the 15th and 16th centuries, Europeans arrived at the coast looking for humans to traffic, which created an insatiable demand for slaves. Compared to other states, the export of enslaved people from Yoruba land was small between 1500 and 1750. Legally, only convicted, hardened criminals could be enslaved, and the Yoruba did not enslave or even go to war with other Yoruba frequently. The peace the Oyo maintained kept Yoruba people off European slave ships. But things changed by the late 18th century. The Oyo peace was over and they were expanded. The peak of the slave trade and the Oyo military expansion overlapped, and the Oyo transformed into a large slave trading power by conquering their neighbours, mainly the Nupe, Bariba and Aja, and selling the war captives to middlemen traders at the coast, who then sold them to European and American slave traders. This business caused several revolts. Alongside these internal problems, the Oyo came under pressure from a Fulani invasion from the north. The empire cracked, and the resulting implosion of the Oyo left its people vulnerable to raids by neighbouring societies like the Dahomey and the Nupe. So while kings and generals got rich off slavery, and the greed of nobles brought the empire to its knees, it would be the average Yoruba that paid the price. Yoruba capitals...
You know, the game of like politics, because this is politics. This is all politics. This is politics and economics and corruption, all those different things. Like, at the end of the day, it's always the people who suffer. It's always the citizens who kind of suffer. I mean, eventually, if you're a terrible leader, eventually your nation or your power, your kingdom corrodes, and then eventually you fall. Like, because the power of a leader is its people, and if the people turn against the leader, well, the leader has no power anymore. So, I mean, eventually it does get up to the top if they're that bad of a leader. But in cases like this, like, it is the main people, it is the people at the bottom who suffer. And what's interesting about the history of like any really religion or civilization or anything, there's always politics and power and stuff like that. But like what's interesting about this is that you can just see this idea of checks and balances within their religion, this idea of like ritual suicide and things was manipulated for evil. It was manipulated for evil, and then leads into these political powers, like these vying for power, this vying for more ability to conquer, and these wars, and it just causes a mess. And then as you see, this vying for power, this greed, and this evil really, it just corrupts the kingdom and everything falls apart. Now, based on what I can tell already, I feel like the reason why Yoruba religion, specifically like Santeria, and there's some of these different religions you see within the East, within the United States, or within the South America, stuff like that, I'm fairly certain a lot of that traveled over to the East, over to the West, my bad, because of the slave trade. I feel like the slave trade played a big part in how this religion spread across to the West and spread across the nations, across the world, I mean. So, like, it looks like the slave trade played a big part in how these things spread, which isn't shocking because anytime you have a trade route or anytime you have a slave trade or anything like that, it's always going to increase religious diversity. It's always going to increase communication and cultural intersection just by the nature of how these things work. So, yeah.
Poured into the Atlantic slave trade in the first quarter of the 19th century. The collapse of Oyo led to 8 decades of warfare that devastated Yoruba land, which left them wide open for, you guessed it, imperial... It's the British again! In 1851, Britain bombarded and sacked the Yoruba city of Lagos. Before the turn of the century, most of West Africa was under either British or French rule. The 19th century saw Christian missionaries arrive and convert millions of Yoruba to Christianity, sending the Yoruba religion into decline. All the different people living in this area were merged together into the new colony and protectorate of Nigeria, which was ruled by British companies who forced the people to grow massive amounts of palm oil needed to fuel Britain's Industrial Revolution. It wasn't until 1960 that the Union Jack was lowered and the flag of the newly independent Nigeria took its place. Diaspora. The transatlantic slave trade dragged millions of Yoruba men, women and children away from their homeland and forced them to build and maintain the economies of the New World. Around 12% of all enslaved people brought to Cuba were of Yoruba origin, and in Brazil they made up 40% of the people sold in the state of Bahia. Those who survived the horrific journey across the sea arrived in the Americas with nothing. While you can take the people away from their culture, you can never take
Yeah,
the
as I
culture
said, the slave
away
trade
from
definitely played a big
Most
part in how
of the
this culture
slave
spread.
people had to convert to Christianity, but the Yoruba reinterpreted Catholic saints as representations
Yep.
of Yoruba Orishas.
This is where like
For
Santeria
example,
comes
the
in.
Virgin Mary was seen as the Orisha Yemen Shah. When religions mix and form a new religion, it's called religious syncretism. This created something distinct from both Catholicism and the Yoruba religion in Africa. In Brazil and Uruguay, it became Candomblé and Umbanda. And in the Caribbean, it became Santeria
Yep,
or Lucumba.
Santeria.
Yoruba words are still used during rituals in these religions, even though the practitioners no longer speak Yoruba. On the 2nd of February in Brazil and Uruguay, you can still observe the Yemen Shah festival, where people sent her gifts on boats sent into the sea. Yoruba drums like the bata drum and talking drums can still be heard in Afro-Latin and Caribbean music, in capoeira practice in Brazil, and in reggae and hip-hop. Yoruba music has deeply influenced African and international music. Fela Kuti was one of Nigeria's most famous musicians and activists and was one of the pioneers of Afrobeat music. Food traditions travelled with the Yoruba to the Americas as well. In Brazil, a little cake called acarajé,
Acarajé.
acarajé,
Acarajé.
acarajé, became the first intangible heritage recognized in the country. Acarajé was sold on the streets by African
It is interesting to me how religions intermingle. Like, new religions sprout out of religions intermingling. So, like, you have Santeria and stuff intermingling of Catholicism and Yoruba. But, like, you even see this with, like, other like, type of religions. So, for instance, Buddhism. Buddhism sprouts out of Hinduism. Hinduism is kind of... Buddhism is takes some principles from Hinduism and changes it. You can even see this within, like, let's just say even within Western culture. You'll have the clashing of mysticism. A lot of mystic religions take aspects of different religions and combine them together. Or you'll even see, like, you know, people of different shades and colors within a religion who blend other religions with the religion. So, like, this is always just interesting to me how new religions sprout out of old religions and they just kind of blend and form their own cultures and their own belief systems off these things just because people come together and intermingle from different backgrounds.
called baianas. They were easily recognized by their distinctive clothing, and you can still see references to these women in Brazilian Carnival, where they spin for hours in their extremely heavy costume.
That's
Acarajé
a
is
lot
a
of
version
colours.
of Yoruba akara, made of mashed black-eyed peas and rolled into a ball and deep-fried in palm oil. Speaking of food, Yoruba cuisine involves starchy meals such as cassava, yam, or plantain pounded in massive mortars, until they get a little elastic and form a sort of cake or ball. Varieties of this are called eba or iyan, and are eaten alongside soups and stews. The Yoruba are known for their love of spice and chili peppers.
I would not thrive
Seriously,
there. I would not
other
thrive.
Nigerians are in awe of Yoruba spice tolerance. One Yoruba saying is, a soul that does not eat pepper is a powerless soul.
Well, then
Some
I'm a
Yoruba
powerless soul,
favorites are
man.
Okra soup,
I do
fried
not do well
rice,
with
amala,
pepper, man.
eforiro, and egusi soup. And while this will destroy the comment section, some people say Yoruba make the best jollof rice. Religion. The traditional Yoruba religion is called Isheshe. There is one supreme god, Oludumare, who
Yeah,
lives in the
so they have
highest
one supreme
heaven.
god.
He's pretty distant because he's pretty busy with godly stuff. So on Earth, he acts through the at least 401 Orishas.
That's not still
Some
as many
Orishas
as
are Ogun,
Hinduism.
the Orisha of iron, Eshu, the trickster Orisha of chance, and also the divine messenger, Oshun, the female Orisha of fertility, Sopano, the Orisha of smallpox and healing, who is very popular in the Americas, where he is called Babalu Aye. and Shango, the Orisha of lightning and thunder.
Oh, so that reminds me of Zeus. Like, honestly, this reminds me of the pantheon. This just reminds me of like the Greek pantheon or the Roman gods or like Norse gods. Like, that's what just what me. This was what me thinks of it. Because you have the god of iron. You have god of lightning like Zeus from the other religion. God of fertility. There's a god of fertility within like Greek religions and stuff. A lot of this almost like if you compare a lot of like polytheistic religions, they seem to always overlap. They always seem to have overlapping gods and concepts. Their myths and their stories are different because they're different people groups with different cultures. But there's a lot of overlap in like the type of gods they create, and like almost every aspect of life has a god. So that's why like these polytheistic religions have so many gods. Like they have hundreds, if not thousands, of gods because they just create a god for like everything. And probably a lot of these gods also are based off of not only items or things of the earth, but as he said earlier, historic figures, people who actually did exist, and they just sort of raise them up a higher level or something like that.
Shango is another example of a real historical king becoming an Orisha. Each believer
history does repeat itself.
Have a particular Orisha they feel connected to. Yoruba religion is deeply moral. One key concept is Omo Luabe, which means good character. One must be humble, honest, and respectful, especially towards elders. One Yoruba proverb says, one's character is what accompanies one to the grave. Wealth does not go that far.
That's not a bad proverb, actually. Like, it is true that, like, your character is more important than your wealth, or the way you behave yourself, the way you act, and the person you are is more important than your wealth, your status, your money. Because all those things are temporary. At the end of the day, you all will eventually die and move on. Now, again, I'm not sure what their belief is about the afterlife or anything like that, but that is actually not a bad proverb. Actually, it's a decent proverb at least.
Yoruba are known for their love of parties and festivals, and they never miss out on a chance to host a fun event. Yoruba will throw a party to celebrate the success of a previous party. Yoruba weddings are known for their high fashion, dancing.
That's like their own version of an after party. Like, throw a party for a successful party. That's just like their own version of an after party. And that's another thing, actually, I think that's interesting about polytheistic religions in general, is that they tend to have a lot of festivals. They tend to have a lot of, like, festivals or, like, celebrations. They tend to be a lot more charismatic, maybe. It's just interesting to me that, like, these polytheistic religions, like, if you look at Greek culture, they had a lot of these temples. And in these temples, they would do a lot of these different acts of worship or, like, these things. And within Greek and Roman culture, they have a lot of festivals and a lot of parties and a lot of stuff like that. In certain cases, depending on which god it was, you would worship that god by acting out, like whether that be in some cases, like with some Greek gods, like you would do sexual rituals, or with some gods you would get like drunk, basically. Like there's some of these within polytheistic religions. It's always interesting to me that there always seems to be this aspect of almost, what's the word I'm looking for? Just like kind of this party mentality, depending on which god you're revering. It's just interesting to me that, again, there's just seems to be a lot of overlap between these religions when they're in the polytheistic field, at least.
Huge guest lists, drumming, unique greetings, and of course, spraying money on the bride and groom. Today, roughly 90% of Yoruba are either Christian or Muslim. The Yoruba are a fairly unique ethnic group in Africa because they're almost split 50-50 between being Christians and Muslims.
Interesting.
Families can have members of both religions, and Yoruba tend to be less extreme on religious issues in Nigeria. A large number of Yoruba people...
So they're saying that the Yoruba people identify often as either Christian or Muslim, but if they believe in these multiple gods and they believe in one god, they obviously don't believe in any orthodox version of either of those religions. They would have to have an adapted version of those religions. Because obviously within Islam you have the Tawhid, and then obviously within Christianity you have the idea of the Trinity, and then within those religions you have like these strict ideas of like how one ought to live their life and practices and things like that. But within this religion, if they still hold to the tenets of these multiple gods, and if they still hold to the tenets of like some of these celebrations and things like that, they're not really holding to the tenets of any orthodox version of Christianity or Islam. They're making their own version of those religions. So I'm just kind of curious if, when he says Yoruba people here, if he's referring to people who actually believe in these sort of religious aspects, or if it's just that they have descended from people who are Yoruba, which it would be a little bit different.
continue to practice their traditional religions through festivals like Gelede. During this festival, the dances are performed by men, masquerading as elaborately costumed male and female figures. During this festival, you'll hear agogo bells, sekere, and talking drums.
Interesting.
During the Gungun festival, the Yoruba worship dead ancestors as masked individuals impersonate the dead, and during the Osun Osogobo festival, the city is cleansed. Fashion. The Yoruba are a fashionable people and take immense pride in their colourful, well-made clothing.
They are very colourful,
One of the oldest
a lot of
traditions
colours.
is the use of an indigo dye to make a patterned cloth called adire, dating back to at least the 11th century. Another very traditional Yoruba textile is aso ike. This technique was created around the 15th century, and today it's still used for special occasions and ceremonies like weddings. Some traditional clothing includes the women's iro, a kind of wrap skirt, and the buba, a blouse. The men wear agbada, a robe, and sokoto, trousers. And let's not forget the very important matching headpieces worn by both men and women. The men's cap is usually the fila, but it's the women's headpiece, the gele, that steals the show. It's made of a long piece of cloth draped in a particular way and wrapped around the head. Of course, the looks wouldn't be complete without beads, usually necklaces and bracelets. The Yoruba are a bead people. They love beads. Beads in the crowns, beads in their body, beads on the walls, beads everywhere. Legends say that the walls of King Oduduwa's palace were encrusted with beads. Although the palace didn't survive to our time, the tradition of giving relief to walls with beads was very strong and is still done today.
I wonder
Now,
why. I wonder
all
why
around
beads
the
are so
world,
important to them.
Millions of Yoruba people, most of them still living in West Africa, but also the millions of descendants of those brought to the Americas, and modern Yoruba that have moved abroad, still fight to keep their traditions alive. And today, you'll still find Yoruba people greeting the world with their vibrant culture, food, music, and fashion. I wish there was somewhere I could greet amazing educational videos. Oh wait, Cognito.
All right. Well, that was fun. That was fun learning more about that culture of people. It still again intrigues me. The overlap I see between a lot of these polytheistic religions. Their stories and their myths and the legends they tell are different. Their cultures are a bit different, but there still seems to be quite often this overlap of the type of gods they create and the way they worship and things. There's a lot of overlap, but I guess you could say that about other religions as well, as far as like there being overlap. But yeah, that was interesting. I think I'm going to end this one out early. As I said, I'm developing a cold, I think, so I'm lacking a little bit of energy. Hopefully you guys still had fun. Hopefully you guys still enjoyed it. But yeah, I think I'm going to head out now. Gotta rest up. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you for interacting with the live chat. If you enjoyed what you see, like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, friends, go out there and light the world yourselves.